Hi everyone. So it's really great to see everyone so excited about our first official block for our project, so block 1. So you've probably watched Rachel's video already, and she will have explained that each month we will have a background theme for our block, and then we will have like a feature theme, so we're calling it an embellishment theme. And we are drawing them out of basically a hat, or I'm drawing them out of a bag. And so Rachel has done the 2 for this month. So the first theme was vintage laces. So I've got some little scraps of vintage lace here, and I'll explain what I'm going to do with them. And then the embellishment theme is a bouncing bunny or a bunny, so a rabbit. So if you've watched Rachel's video, which I'm assuming you have because her video is posting first, we're starting off each month with showing you how we're piecing together our backgrounds. So this first month, we're teaching you the different ways that you can attach your foundation background fabrics to your base plate. So this would be your foundation layer, and then you'll have like your background fabrics which you're going to put on. So Rachel, I think she's shown you a couple of different ways to do that in her video, and then I'm going to show you how to attach them using Kantha-style stitching. So just to give you an idea, I've pulled a couple of things that I've already got just to show you the different ways. Now Rachel's already explained these, but this is a piece that's a work in progress. I haven't done much progress on it yet. But I basically went to a class with Lisa Mattock, who is an Australian slow stitcher who's amazing. And the way that I have pieced my backgrounds together here is just using a very small running stitch. So I used perlé cotton to do that, and on each piece of fabric, which I've just sort of patchworked together, I've done a simple running stitch to hold them in place. So I'll just hold that up higher. Hopefully you can see on that green one it stands out. Okay, so this one is literally, I've just pieced the backgrounds. I haven't done anything further with it yet. And then this piece here is something I bought from a lady called Textile All Sorts. Well, she's from Textile All Sorts, from her name's Melanie on Instagram. And just to show you another way that you could attach the fabric is she's done a herringbone stitch. So a more decorative stitch. I think that's a bit like the crazy patch quilting. I haven't done that before, but I'm assuming that that's similar to what they do. They do more elaborate stitches. So you could do simple crosses, you could do blanket stitch. This is herringbone stitch. Okay, and what she's done with her Suffolk puffs or her yo-yos, she's just done a little tiny overcast or satin stitch, which I think Rachel showed you how to do. What I like to do most of the time is I like to do a running stitch. It's also known as Kantha stitching, or they also did this type of stitching on Japanese boro quilts. And this is a piece that Mum made for me, and you can see she's got running stitch. Kantha style stitching. She's done that all over. Mum tends to do a lot of Kantha stitching. I do as well. And then she's pieced the extra bits on top. So to show you another one, old Japanese fabrics. Some are new, some are old. There's this sort of boro style of stitching. And just to show you a piece of Kantha quilt, I have a lot of Kantha quilt offcuts. You can see the tiny little stitching. So that's what I'm going to show you today. Super easy. This is basic to do. Some more scraps of Kantha quilt, and you can see they go in different directions. They're not specific about always running one direction, and I think it's interesting to sometimes go in different directions. So thinking about our backgrounds, I've got a whole heap of things that I've pulled here today. My inspiration is coming from this thread, well, this company of threads. I bought these 2 threads just before Christmas. I haven't used them yet. So these threads are called Painters Threads Collection. So www.paintersthreads.eu, and they are from Germany, made in Germany. So just hopefully you can see their website on there. Hopefully it's in focus. And these are hand-dyed threads. So I bought Mum some of these for Christmas, and I picked up a couple for myself. That one looks really interesting. I'm going to be interested to see what I can come up with that one. But I love this hand dyed kind of effect. Now I've played around with hand dyeing before, hand dyeing bits of old fabric, and I've done it with threads as well. So this is what I'm going to experiment with. I'm going to do a little bit of hand dyeing, so that will be in my video next week. I'm no expert at dyeing. I just went and I picked up these from our Spotlight, which in America is like your Hobby Lobby or your Michaels or Joann's, I think. They're just a liquid dye. I picked the 2 greens that they had, and I'll play around with it. I also, with these ones, what I used was those spray inks that they use in like junk journaling and scrapbooking and stuff like that. And also the brown, I actually used something called Parisian Essence. I think that's how you pronounce it, Parisian. I wanted to get that real earthy tone. So I'm going to give you an idea of what I'm doing, what my thoughts are in my head, and then I'm going to show you how I Kantha stitch and stitch my background down. So that will be what's happening this week. Then next week I will add on some of my elements, my layers on top. And then for the last couple of weeks I'll be doing a lot of embellishing and finishing off. So what I've done is I actually want this to look a bit like a scene, so with a bunny. So I've got all these bunnies, and I'm going to pick one of them that I get from the lady who made this. I'll put a link to her store. She has a, she sells through Instagram. She's in Australia in Melbourne. And I've mentioned her before. Her name is Purveyor of Reclaimed Textiles. I think that's pretty much it. But I'll put a link below. So she makes these bunnies. I think she cuts them out of this. So there's an old piece of quilt. I've got another one out of quilt. I've actually got quite a few. These are old Sanderson fabrics. So I've had these for a while. So what I thought I would do is I'm going to use one of these ones. I'm using one of the quilt ones, and I think I'm going to use this one just because it will stand out on the page because it's got a bit of thickness. I like the stripe as well, but I might go with that side. So this is what I'm thinking I'm going to do. I'm going to layer up some background pieces. I've picked a bunch of blue. So I've got scraps here, scrap of old quilt. I've just cut the blue bit out. This is from an old lacy top, which I showed in my first video. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to play around with them until I like the look of how they're layered. Now this I got from one of the Kantha quilts. So let me just show you a piece of Kantha quilt. So when you get Kantha quilts, I've got quite a few big quilts and I've got some offcuts as well. If you separate them and have a look in between, there's usually different fabrics. So that one's pretty plain. Let me find another one. This one here. If I can separate that a little bit, you can see that there's different fabrics on the inside. So for the one I'm using, there were all these different little pieces of fabric, and then these two as well. And I really liked this one. Might use that one. So I took the piece apart, undid the stitching, and had red Kantha stitching. I'm going to use that. So I'm playing around with my layout to see what I like. And then what I will do is I will pin it in place, and I'm going to just do the Kantha stitching. I just keep playing. So rules with layout, really, I don't really follow any specific rules. I just play around until I like the way it looks. And what I do once I've laid it all out, I usually take a photograph because I will forget what I liked as I take bits up. Because what you need to do, you can actually pin this all in place and just do the Kantha stitching straight across. Some people do that. Or you could do a piece at a time if you want to, but I tend to try and do the background all in one. It saves time. I don't want the blue to go down too far because then I actually want the green. I want green for the bottom. So when I was saying that I was influenced by this thread, I'm going to get all my old bits of lace. So these are just little offcuts, little bits and pieces that I've got. And I'm going to try and do some dyeing like this. So using these Rit dyes next week, that's what I'll be doing. Okay, and then with the bits of lace, I'm going to put a green piece of, I'm actually going to put a piece of Kantha quilt. I'm going to put that underneath. I'm going to layer the bits of lace however I want them to. I'll play around with them so they look good, and they'll all be dyed in shades of green. So it's like the earth. I might have that hanging off the bottom. Bits of tulle that I've ripped up. That will be layered on, and then I'm going to have a feature flower on the side. So I'm tossing up between this one, which I think will be really pretty, or I also liked this one, which I cut off I think it was like an Indian trim. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use yet. And then I'm going to have my bunny coming through. So it's like a garden. And I'll probably have some other flowers and bits and pieces as well. So I might use some Suffolk puffs to make flowers. I'm not sure yet. Mine's going to be, it's going to be quite literal, like a picture with a bunny, cute bunny. So that will be next week when I look a bit more into adding my feature elements. I'll make decisions on that kind of thing. So for this week, I just need to finish playing around with my layout, and then I'm going to start stitching. So I'm just going to pause the camera now while I work out that layout, and then I'll come back when it's all pinned in place. I'm just going to pin this, and I'm going to go straight into the stitching. Okay, I'll see you back soon. Alright, so I've worked out how I want to place my pieces of background fabric, and I've pinned them all in place. So starting off, I'm taking the variegated thread and I'm going to Kantha stitch or running stitch onto the green piece of fabric at the bottom. So I just select a needle. It's nothing specific, just one that has an eye big enough for me to thread it. And then I'm going to do my quilter's knot. And my plan is to do the Kantha stitching, which is just simple running stitch on the green fabric using the variegated thread. So just coming up through the fabric, just like you would with your normal running stitch. You are going to go down through the fabric. So I've just come up there. And then I'm going to show you that you go down through the fabric and then back up and down and back up. Sorry, you can't see very well because of that other piece of fabric. You can see the stitches there. You make a few stitches and then pull it through. So I will pull it up closer to the camera to show you again. So that little piece of fabric's getting in the way, so I'm just going to remove those bottom two so you can see what I'm doing. So showing you again, we're going down through the fabric and up, down and up, down and up, making a few stitches before pulling the thread through. So you can see there that we've got a little running stitch. Now it's not perfectly straight. We don't need to worry about being perfect. None of our stitching is perfect. Even on the Kantha quilts, you can see that they're not perfect. The imperfections add character. If you want to be perfect though, that's totally up to you. Everyone has their own unique style. So continuing on with the running stitch, you're going to keep doing that all the way through to the end before you turn around and you come back, and you are literally just doing running stitches in lines. So in a minute I'm going to speed up the video, and then so you can see me do the first row, and then I'm going to cut it and come back so you can see it completed, so you don't have to keep watching me stitch. So I'm just working my way along that first row, go a little bit crooked. I'm trying to keep my stitches fairly consistent in length, but again, not perfect. We don't care if it's perfect or not. And then I keep going till I get to the end of the row, and then I will just turn around and come back the other direction. Alright, so I have finished the Kantha stitching on the green fabric. As you can see there, it's in the variegated cotton. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the other pieces of fabric. So I'm trying to pick colours of thread. So some of these threads are thin wool threads, the sort of darker blue ones are. Then I've got a crochet, vintage crochet cotton, a thin one, and a couple of perle cottons as well. And I mix them up a bit, trying to sort of add a bit of contrast. And then I even use some of the thin normal sewing cotton as well, so you'll see me do that. So on this first pale blue fabric, I am doing a slight variation of so it's still the running stitch, but what I'm doing is I do running stitch in 2 lines close together, then I leave a gap and 2 lines close together, just to give it a different look. So I'm now just about to finish my second line, and I will show you what it looks like. So 2 lines fairly close together. Now onto my third line, and I leave a little bit of a larger gap so that the pairs of stitches are spaced out. And when I'm doing the pairs of stitches, I try to match them in length just to make it look consistent. Okay, so I'm now doing my 4th row. I'm almost done on my 4th row, and you can see that there are 2 lines of stitches. The pattern's now clear. So here you go, you can see my 2 lines, all my paired lines. So I'm now picking just a normal sewing cotton. This is just an old one. I've got a lot of old ones I like to use. Just normal quality cotton, which I'm going to do a running stitch on the quilt piece. I wanted to do something subtle on this one, just so that the pieces of quilt, they're not overwhelmed, because there'd be lots of pattern. So just a normal running stitch, but this time I'm going vertically, so up and down, up and down, up and down, just changing the direction to make it more interesting. So I've finished the vertical running stitch on the top left hand corner on the quilt pieces, and I've also done a horizontal red running stitch on the second fabric down on the right. Now what I'm going to do, just for something different, on the darker blue piece of fabric with the pale perle cotton, I'm going to stitch crosses. So just to give it a different look, these are not evenly spaced, they are randomly placed. And I even do a few crosses onto some of the bordering fabrics as well, which you'll see when I'm done. So the cross is simple, just like doing a cross stitch in a sampler, but we have a vertical and a horizontal stitch making a cross. Again, not perfectly spaced, slightly different size crosses, but they look good in the end. So here's what my crosses look like, and then here they are fully done. Now on my final two fabrics, the bottom check fabric on the left, I do a horizontal running stitch, and then on the pale blue and white stripe fabric at the bottom on the right, I just do more of those crosses. So here is my background piece of fabric fully put together with all the different styles of Kantha stitching. So just to remind you what I'm thinking for next week, I've got this floral piece of fabric that I've cut out, and then I've got my bouncing bunny. I will be hand dyeing my vintage laces so that my lace background comes into play, and that will all be pieced together next week. So I hope you like seeing the different styles of stitching that you can do to add to the styles that Rachel showed you as well. Now I wanted to give you an update on my journal cover or my journal title page. So I've actually cut out my Roxy's Journal of Stitchery, and I've done seed stitching all over it. Now that is onto a base piece of fabric, which is an old piece of sheet. It is one of my favorite old sheets, this green one. I use it all the time, and down the bottom I've also sewn on some vintage lace. So I'm just showing you how I'm seed stitching. So where all the white fabric is, I've stitched all over it and even around the edges, so that that piece of embroidered fabric is completely stitched down to the base fabric, and I've also stitched it down to one of my book pages. So you'll see in a minute that it's actually stitched into my first page. Okay, just to give you a close-up, it is stitched in white cotton, so I'm not sure if you can see it too well, but it gives it a lovely texture, the seed stitching. So that is fully secured now. Now the next thing I wanted to do, and I've been thinking about doing this, in my journal I want to have tabs and bits of laces sticking out. I want it to be quite textural. So I'm going to make a little tab that's going to be attached to the top right hand corner of my title page. So I've got a piece of quite thick sort of cotton that I've shibori dyed. I did a shibori dye class, and I've dyed quite a few fabrics, and I'm just trimming it down so that it's going to be the size of a tab. So this tab is going to be folded over, so it needs to be big enough so that I can fold it and stitch it to both sides. You'll see in a minute how I do that. So now what I want to do is I want to layer a few pieces of fabric on top of it, again to make it quite textural. So I've got a piece of that cotton, that light blue, you can't really see, it looks a bit white, but it is a very pale aqua that I used in my background of my block for this month. And I'm going to put that piece of fabric layered with some other pieces as well. So I've grabbed one of the pieces of Kantha quilt that came from the inside of that quilt, and I'm going to pop that on, and then I'm also going to pop on some dyed, it's like cheesecloth. So just playing around with a few bits and pieces until I find what I like the look of. I think I'm going to put some buttons on as well, so I've pulled out a few of my vintage buttons. I'm finding 3 different ones. I always like to do things in odd numbers, so 3 will work well. And then I'm going to stitch it all together. So to stitch it all together, I'm just using normal sewing cotton, sewing machine cotton, just a white thread. And I'm just doing like a very loose running stitch, like not loose as in it's taut, I pull it tight, but it's random stitches just holding it all down. It's not like perfectly even. Alright, so I've got all those base pieces stitched in place. Now I'm going to stitch this little piece of lace. Now this little piece of lace and the cheesecloth underneath are both tea dyed. So I've tea dyed them they were both white, just to give them that sort of grungy look. So to stitch this piece of trim on, I'm just doing little stitches over the base of the trim just to hold it in place, and I do that the whole way along. Multiple stitches just to make sure it's nice and secure. Okay, so that is all stitched down. Now I'm going to add the 3 buttons. I'm just using a variegated cotton thread. It's quite a thick one. It's a hand-dyed thread. So I stitch through each button twice, just making sure that they're nice and secure. So I'm just folding over my tab and testing out how it's going to look on my page. Now I'm going to decorate the back side. So I'm finding a few fabrics to layer on, and what I'm going to use is a piece of this vintage lace. So I'm just tearing off some of this lace to get the little part that I want. So I'm happy with the little bits and pieces that I've selected, and I also pick a little piece of striped fabric to layer it up again to give it more texture. So just putting the little bit of lace on top, and again all I'm going to do with just a piece of white cotton is I'm just going to randomly stitch that in place, stitching over different parts of the lace and the fabric to make sure that everything is secure. Alright, so everything is stitched down nice and securely, and I'm just testing out again to see how it looks. And looking at the back piece, I feel like it needs a little bit more colour, so I'm going to add a little bit more hand stitching onto it. So I'm pulling out a thread in one of my favourite colours, which is a neon pink. This is a very vibrant neon pink. It's actually an Appleton wool. These are new wools that have come out recently, and they've made them in all different neon or fluorescent colours, which I love. So I'm just stitching 3 little crosses on one edge just to add a bit more colour and interest onto that side of the tab. Okay, I'm happy with my tab now on both sides. So it's time to stitch it to my title page. So I'm just using a plain navy blue cotton, which kind of matches the base fabric of the tab. And I do a few stitches just to secure the tab in place before folding it in half. And I use a quilter's clip. I think they're called Wonder Clips. The little clear clip, just to hold it folded over and in place. And then all I'm doing is a simple, it's like a whip stitch. Probably what Rachel showed you, because that's what she often uses to sew her background pieces in place. So it's just a simple whip stitch. So I've stitched all the way along the bottom, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch up the sides to close that folded over piece of fabric. So I do it on both sides, making sure it's very secure. So my tab is stitched on and I really like the way it looks. You won't see that flappy bit on the back once I sew down my other pages. So I'm just going to show you, give you an idea of how it's going to look in my book. So folded in half, then I will be getting my sampler pages stitched in. So these sample pages aren't stitched in yet, I've just laid them on top so you can see what it looks like. And then you'd flip over and that would be my first block there. So just reminding you that it will have the flower and the bunny, and I will have the vintage lace, etc. So I hope you like what we are doing so far. Obviously, if you're super keen, you could do more than the 6 pages over the 6 months. It's up to you, but we think that 1 block a month would be achievable for most people, including our beginners that we're loving, that we love having in the group. So the last thing I just wanted to show you was my Christmas present from my sister Rachel. So she sent me these things for Christmas, and also my mum got the same things. So the first thing is these beautiful quilt blocks. So they're log cabin quilt blocks with lovely old fabrics, old feed sap fabrics, and I think they're 1940s fabrics. And then I got this beautiful handmade book with gorgeous embroidery on it and pieces of fabric. And it's a blank book, which I think I'm going to use for a little art journal because I've been wanting to do one for a while. And then look at this gorgeous spool of fabrics. I love the way that this is presented. So I'm just going to open it up and show you all the different bits and pieces. Now these pieces are all perfect for our project because there's lots of little bits, and you only need little bits for our project. So we've got a bunch of Suffolk puffs there, and then that's a piece of old quilt that's like a wrap around the fabric stash. And then these are all the different fabrics that are on the spool. There's heaps of them. And you really don't need bigger pieces because slow stitching, this type of stuff that we're doing, you only need bits and pieces. You don't need the big bits like you use in quilting. And I must say, these fabrics smell beautiful. Piece of quilt. There's quite a few pieces of quilt in this stash. There's a couple of embroideries. Look how pretty this embroidery is. Perfect for slow stitching projects. Just lovely florals. I love all the really old floral fabrics. I'd say most of these fabrics are English. They've come from England. The lady that Rachel bought them from is in England. I'm going to show you her details at the end. Lots of little pieces of quilt. So many fabrics. Another embroidery there. It's a really pretty piece of quilt. Another lovely piece of quilt. Even when your flowers are coming off the edge of the page, you can stitch onto them. So many different scraps of quilt, which is perfect. And then this piece is quite a big piece. And then underneath, that is the most beautiful linen. It's really soft. And then look at the cotton you get underneath. That's a bonus. That's great for slow stitching, for your Kantha-style stitching. So just to show you the business card that goes along with this, all this stuff is from the Doll's House. On Etsy, she's known as Luworth Blue, and her name is Debbie. And Debbie is wonderful, and she makes amazing packs. I wanted to show you what I got for Christmas, just in case you're interested in getting some for yourself for our project or for other things. So just contact Debbie. She's on Etsy. You can follow her on Instagram, and I'm pretty sure Debbie's taking part in our Journal of Stitchery project as well. So thanks for watching this week, and I'll be back again next week with another video. Bye.